Hi, this is Andrew Smith, instructor at Ferris State University, runner of art by Smitty.com. This is going to be part 9 in my Dota 2 workshop tutorial series. In the previous part, we've baked out maps, normal maps specifically, within XNormal and got them into Photoshop and made some minor adjustments with Undo. In part 9, we're going to talk about creating your diffuse maps. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and open up 3ds Max. I'm going to first go ahead and say File, Import, run to my desktop, and grab my high poly object. This is going to be our reference mesh, so make sure import is editable poly, import is single mesh, click on import, and this is going to be, like I said, my reference mesh. So we're going to be extracting data, or transferring data, I should say, from the high poly mesh to the low poly mesh in the form of a texture map. I'll hit F4 to turn off my wireframe, G to turn off my grid, and from here, this is an editable poly, so if I click it and hit 5, I'll be entered into elements of object mode. From here, I'm going to select certain elements and apply certain materials to these elements, so we can bake out a diffuse map, or in other words, a color map. This first material slot, I'm going to call this, well, we'll make this that nice orangish red color that Dota has in all of their designs. It's usually a bit desaturated, maybe not that much. Again, the color really doesn't matter right now, since we can essentially go in and change it in post, but this looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and just call this red. And it's already applied to everything, so that's pretty good. From here, I'm going to select a second material slot right next to it. We're going to call this one leather for the straps. And coming in here and selecting a nice brown color, something like that should do nicely. I'll select all of these elements of this object over here, and I'm going to have to deselect the handle. But this is much easier than coming in and selecting each one of these meshes individually, since this guy is almost 500,000 polygons. It's lagging my system just a bit. Okay, there we go. We now have the brown leather applied to the handles. From here, I'm going to select a new material slot, and this one we'll call blade. Now you can see how much lag I'm getting here. And honestly, what I like to do is I'm going to save this scene really quickly in case I need to come back and bake any textures or make a change and then bake a texture. It's much easier for me just to open a max file than to go and reassociate all of these materials again. So I'm going to call this light blade underscore bake, so I know if I ever need to come back and bake anything, all I got to do is open up this file, and the settings should all be saved. I'm going to tint this color. I'm going to make it a little bit lighter. I'm also going to tint it a little bit towards the blue and say OK. And then I'll select the blade in my elements of object mode and apply the material accordingly. Okay, now all we have left are the glowing parts. And these glowing parts, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of look at my reference over on the other monitor real quick. We're going to make it a very light red. We'll just go ahead and say 100% self-illuminated, even though it's going to show up as simply a color. It doesn't really matter, just visually for my eyes. So I need to come in here and select all the different parts that are going to be glowing, holding control and selecting different elements. Now if we were using Dedo, we'd have to use some of Dedo's standard materials that come in the form of an FBX file. But this being a very stylized asset, I don't really need to worry about bringing in and using Dedo for this project. I want all of my diffuse color to be to very much resemble this hand painterly feel that Valve is done so eloquently with Dota 2. Okay, so all materials are applied. At this point, I'm going to close out the material editor, hit 6 to get out of sub-object mode, and finally Control S to save my file, so I can always come back and not lose any of this, this first 5 minutes that we've been wasting. Next, I'm going to select my object, so I'm in object mode, and right-click and say hide selection. That way my system's not going to be lagging, and I'll turn on my grid just to reorient myself. Now I'm going to go to File, Import, say the light blade low poly, again single mesh editable poly import. There we are, looking good. With this guy being applied, I'm going to select the unwrap UVW and open up the editor real quick, and I need to make sure that here under preferences that I'm rendering out a width of 1024 by 512. Hit OK. And that way I'm going to be exporting the correct mapping coordinates. And before I do anything else, I'm going to make a template for my diffuse map. And I'm going to go up here to, let's say, Tools, Render UVW Template. Again, width, 1024, height, 512. From here, sorry, preferences are getting in the way. I'm not sure why these menus keep sticking up. We'll hit Solid. We want to fill this with white. We don't care about the overlap. We don't care about edges right now, so I'll say render UV template, and I'll get this. I'll save this to my desktop as selection, and we can go ahead and just do a JPEG is fine. Hit OK. Close it out. This time I'm going to turn on edges and make sure that the edges are black. Sometimes it's nice to know where I'm painting in my diffuse map in Photoshop, so this wireframe render is really going to allow me to see what I'm painting on. So we'll call this one wireframe. Again, JPEG should be fine for what we're doing. Close this out, close that out, close that out, and we don't really need this anymore, so we're good to go. Now, since I baked my normal maps inside of XNormal, I'm kind of predicting or forecasting that my diffuse map might not match perfectly to my normal map. So this is a pretty simple object, but you can imagine, you're working on a model like Gears of War. You're going to have a lot of different pieces with a lot of different little colors. It's much easier to bake the diffuse map than go in and hand paint it. In this case, I could probably hand paint, this object in the diffuse map pretty easily. It's not that difficult of an object. Anyways, let's go ahead and bake the diffuse and just see what we get. I'm going to say unhide all. I'm going to hit H. Make sure that I have my low poly selected. I will, at this point, come in here and hit 0 to bring up my render to texture dialog box. I'm going to enable projection mapping, and then I need to pick the high poly object. Hit add, and it might think here for a second because it's trying to calculate the cage, but we'll let Max do its thing. Alright, so it's attempted to create the cage for us. Now, this cage is an extrusion, so to speak, of the low poly mesh. As you can see, the wireframes match up quite nicely. And essentially, whatever is between the mesh and the cage is what's going to get baked. So the idea is that we make sure that the high poly object is within the cage and the mesh. So I'm going to go to cage, hit reset, snap it back to the surface of the low poly geometry. I'll hit shaded so I can actually see what's being captured. You can see some of these handles are sticking out and some things down here. I'm going to just push this out in an amount until I'm going to click here and let it update until I don't get any of that clipping. Now the idea is we want to stick as close as possible as we can, and at this point I'm looking pretty good except for maybe a few of these verts. And I can actually come down here to cage and select these verts and only push those out without pushing everything else out. So this is quite handy. I might do those a couple more times, but everything else is looking pretty good. Okay, yep, we look fine. I'll see what we get. At this point, I need to use existing channel 1 because we unwrapped it. We need to make sure we're using that unwrap and not an automatic unwrap. Got to use your common sense here. From here to output, I'm going to hit add, and I want to create a diffuse map. Hit add elements. Now notice we have a lot of other options here. We could even do some ambient occlusion if we wanted to. I might hit add and add the ambient occlusion really quickly. Here I'm going to save this to my desktop. Just save it out as color. Again, JPEG's fine. And OK. Again, we have to change the width to 1024. The height's going to be 512. Or we could just click use automatic map size, not a big deal. And that looks good, so I'm going to come down here to my AO pass, and I'm going to adjust these settings as well. 512. Now, I like to keep these at the default just to see what I get first, then I'll come in and adjust AO settings. But I just want to see what I'm going to get. Honestly, I don't like using max. I usually like to just honestly use X normal to generate my ambient occlusion. And we might actually go back and do that since we never did that in the previous part. Okay, so everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and select the diffuse, hit render. Don't display, continue. And then this is going to go ahead and render this out. I'll pause the video while it renders. Okay, here's what my final result was. I still have a lot of errors in some of these in these areas, so I need to come back in here and adjust my cage. What that is telling me. So I'm going to go adjust my cage and rebake these. Okay, so I did get better results after pushing my cage out a little bit more. We don't have any of the errors that were noticeable before. I'm going to close this out. Now my ambient occlusion pass needs some work. You can see as I zoom in, it's quite grainy. You know, we can see the definite contrast between pixels. We want as little contrast between these neighboring pixels as we can. So in order to get rid of that noise, what we need to do is come here to select my ambient occlusion and up the samples. I'll set these to 1024. They were at 16. This is going to take quite a bit longer to render. Usually you don't want to go higher than that. So that should be good. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and rebake those, and we'll see what the results are. Okay, so the diffuse and AO just got done baking again. Taking a look here, it's the diffuse that spit out. And then here's the ambient occlusion. Now if you zoom in, you don't see any of that pixelation. We have a nice smooth gradient transition between pixels, you know, and this is actually going to work quite nicely. So we might not even have to go and bake AO because I like the results that I'm getting here in Max. Not bad. So I'm going to close this out. From here, we pretty much have all of the different maps that we need to move forward. What I'm going to do is open up Photoshop real quick, and here's the normal map that we were left with after the last video tutorial. I'm going to open up the AO, diffuse, and the two different UV layouts here and merge them into one. So coming here to selection, actually I'll grab my wireframe, hit Control A, Control C, close it, paste it on here, and I'm going to name this layer wireframe. I will name this layer selection, and I'll create a new folder and call this, let's call it guides. And we'll select both of these and throw them in the guides folder, so I can turn those on and off. I'm also going to select, select this guy, make sure it's set to multiply. Same thing with the selection. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder down below here. Call this one bakes. That way I can always come back to my original bakes and see what I got. We'll call this diffuse. And we'll call this one AO. Alright, so turning off my guides really quickly, I'm going to set my ambient occlusion also to multiply, and you can see now that this gives us a real nice base to go off and start painting on. One thing I do want to check before I start painting though is I want to make sure that my diffuse and I want to make sure my diffuse matches up with the normal map. That'd be really weird if these, since they were baked in separate programs, it would not be very good if they didn't match up perfectly. So now I'm just kind of coming in here and making sure that they do line up correctly. And I am seeing a little bit of dissonance. So there's a little bit of a difference. So we're just going to go ahead and bake these out and see what we see. Okay. I'm just going to delete that. We just brought that in for reference. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-Shift-S and save this into textures. Call this light blade underscore diff for diffuse. Okay, now if you're looking at the Dota 2 character texture guide that Valve has provided us, you'll see that, yes, they do bake out ambient occlusion and diffuse maps and normal maps, but they also bake out something called a light map. And let me bring this PDF over here real quick and kind of start to skim through it. So here's the diffuse map, which we essentially just created. There's their ambient occlusion pass, which they've overlaid, and we kind of had the same technique going on with the light blade. Scrolling down even further, here they create a point light map. So place a couple of simple white point lights in your scene and render out a light map. We don't need ambient occlusion in this light pass, just pure point light information, preferably with a material that captures specular highlights. Okay, so it might also help us with the starting point to introduce the top to bottom light to dark gradient, as you can see here. So I'm going to go inside of Max and render out this point light map. After we do that, then we're going to have a really nice base to start painting on here with their bear character. So coming back to Max, I can, again, I'm going to save this file real quick, and we'll come over here, hit add a lighting map really quickly. A lighting map, we need this to be 1024, and the height needs to be 512. Shadows, direct light, indirect light, all that is good to go. I'm going to close this out really quickly, and I'm just going to right click and say hide selection, because essentially I don't need to see my my low poly. Okay, so now all I'm left with is my high poly mesh. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and go to create. We'll go to lights, standard, mental ray area omni will work just fine for this. I'll click once in my scene to create it and drag this guy up. And I'm going to make sure it's kind of coming in from the top here. And actually I might hit Shift A to actually center it to my weapon, and then move it up. And then finally move it forward just a little bit, so it's actually capturing some shadow information here. From here, I need to go to my light settings, make sure that I'm using some decay, so inverse square decay will probably work nicely. I'll make sure that the attenuation starts around just the top of the blade, and we want to make sure that this color is white, which it should be by default. And then area light parameters, I'm just going to make that a little bit big so we don't get super crisp shadows. Alright, next up we have to remember it told us that we had to create a material that had some specular information to it. So I'm going to go ahead and make this quite dark, and then actually add some specularity to this, maybe giving it a little bit more gloss, and just applying it to the entire weapon. From here, I just want to hit Shift Q really quickly and get a quick idea of what this is going to render like, and then I have kind of an idea of what it's going to render like to texture. So I just got to get an idea real quickly about how this looks. Okay, so I like the placement. I think I'd like it to fall off a little bit more. Okay, so I'm back in Photoshop after compiling my my light pass. So I have my diffuse, my diffuse, which looks like this, my ambient occlusion, which looks like this, which is set as a multiply layer. Then I have a light pass that's set up as multiply for the shadows. So it's kind of basically adding shadows. I have that set at 75% opacity. Then I duplicated it and played with the levels a little bit and set this to add. So it's going to actually add a highlight to certain areas. And I might actually tone that down just a little tiny bit. But I do feel like it's important. And then ambient occlusion over the top finally. So this is going to be the base in which I start painting and adding some brush strokes, kind of like when we were concepting, but this is essentially going to act as my diffuse map. Okay, so from here I'm going to speed up the video as I paint the diffuse map, and just using basically my hard edge brush and my soft edge brush. Basically I'll keep all these layers down here in my bakes, and I'll just create a new folder called paint, and I'll just duplicate my bakes layer, hit Control E to turn it into one layer, and then put this in as my painting layer, and we'll just call this pass 1. And then I can create layers and start painting on top of this. And then this guy I might even come in and adjust levels. So that's where we'll go, and the rest will just be a time lapse. Okay, so welcome back. From here, what I'm doing is I'm noticing, I have the Bloodseeker's original weapon over on my other monitor, and I'm kind of taking a look at the colors and making some overall adjustments to, using the replace color to make the highlights, instead of white, more orangish. And then I'm going in here and selecting my diffuse pass with the magic wand tool, so I can select a layer. This is known as like a matte pass. So I can select just the handle and copy it and duplicate it so it's on its own layer, and then I can start making my color adjustments just to the leather straps, which is really, really handy. From here, I'm going to continue going in and just making those overall color adjustments to the entire mesh to make it feel cohesive. And honestly, just match the texture map that Valve was using for the original design. So I think that's a big part in this, is keeping that underlying art style and theme that Valve has created, and trying to mimic it to the best of my abilities. From here, I'm just making some overall adjustments to the color of the blade. Noticing that my reference, the blade was primarily white with a few orange, darker shaded areas, specifically on the corners. So again, just kind of mimicking in here and creating new layers and collapsing them and playing with levels. Pretty shortly here, I'll start going in and actually hand painting some of the details out, and I'm still just making basic color adjustments at this point. So using your magic wand tool is huge. I like to use the replace color function in Photoshop. It's pretty helpful, and it can really help you make some overall adjustments very, very quickly that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Here I went into the removing some of the shadows and some of the highlights. Just giving me a more globally ambient lit texture, because again, this is the diffuse, so I'm going to let the normal map take care of a lot of the shading and stuff inside the game engine. So I want the diffuse map to be kind of ambiently lit, meaning I don't have any pure black dark shadows. It's all just different tints of red with some GI or some global illumination bouncing around. So I believe from here I start rotating the canvas over so I can start painting some of these lines a little bit nicer. And actually I guess we'll do that later, but now I'm just kind of coming in and painting up the edges, extending the borders a little bit, just so that when mapping comes into play I don't have any black lines showing up. I probably should have taken care of this in Max with my edge padding, but I can just paint these out myself in Photoshop in a few minutes, so it's not really a big deal. This is faster than going in back into Max and rebaking, and I've already been adjusting the texture map, so this makes more sense to me. Again, just kind of visiting all of the different borders around the entire model, making sure I'm collapsing everything. So now we rotated the canvas, so I can much easier paint out some of this aliasing that was going on from my bake. Just kind of smoothing things out, making it look nice, the finishing touches. And I really didn't have to hand paint a whole lot on this texture map because I was using baked textures. So the idea is if you have a nice low poly that matches your nice high poly sculpt, you're not going to really have to do much painting at all when it comes to creating your diffuse map. This is very different from back in the day before we had the baking abilities. I think next I'm going to go in and I want to make sure that I'm keeping in some of the symbols and the lore behind Bloodseeker. So I'm going to go in and paint some of the symbolism that was kind of found in his original weapon design, trying to stay as true as I can to the character. But I'm going to go ahead and add a little twist to it where, I kind of add an S or something, something that kind of represents my logo, but I wanted to represent more of Bloodseeker than I wanted to represent my logo. I just kind of want to put my own little mark on this guy, and using the hard edge brush, just kind of swiping. And I'm doing this all in a separate layer, so I can just simply delete it or remove it, or just add more color or duplicate it if it's not quite, if it's a little see-through. Because I do tend to paint with like a 90% opacity brush. That way I can blend and mix colors nicely. So there I go, duplicating it, and now I'm just kind of coming in and refining it, making sure that my edges are nice and crisp. And it doesn't look like I was painting it. It looks like Bloodseeker actually painted it with a real paintbrush on the weapon himself, or it was embedded through magical powers or something, I don't know. And I felt over here was another good opportunity on the weapon to add some of those decals and designs that I didn't necessarily add in the concept. So again, concepting was just a nice way to flush out the weapon, and now I'm actually going in and making it perfect the way that I want it to be. Now, in the original design, I noticed that they had some highlights along these edges, so this paint job was actually kind of beveled in almost. So eventually I'll come in here and start painting some like nice orange highlights around the corners of the paint details. And there we go. Just kind of making it feel like it pops a little bit. In retrospect, I probably should have sculpted that in a little bit, but I only really want it in the diffuse map. It's not a major change, and so I don't really need to worry about it being in the normal map. From here, I'm just kind of making some more overall color adjustments to the different parts of the mesh, and then I'll even add, going up in Photoshop and in your Adjustments tab, if you go to Window Adjustments, you'll be able to add some photo filters. So I add some nice warming photo filters to the entire object. And now I'm just kind of cleaning up the edges again, since I added some color adjustments to different layers. But photo filters are great because I can just kind of make overall global adjustments to the look of the weapon. Now I was looking in the reference art, and he had some blood splattered on his weapon, and I felt his name is Bloodseeker. I better go in here and add the same kind of blood details that were in the original weapon, and just kind of again encouraging sticking to the true design here. So that's the whole reason behind this. Eventually I'll come in here with a nice textured brush, custom brush that I have, which is like a splatter brush, and just kind of lightly touch different areas. Again, right here you can see I'm doing too many of these splatter strokes, and so I'm deleting them as I make them. The idea is that it's very subtle, just like when we were sculpting the high poly model. We don't want to go crazy with the cuts and the crazy super detailed work in our texture maps. Again, that's what I think students will do a lot, is they'll just go crazy with detail. They find out, oh, I can do these kind of details, let's go crazy over the whole weapon with it. No, it's all about subtlety. So after I make some adjustments to the blood, I'm pretty much done with the texture. Didn't really take too long to make this final diffuse map, as long as you're baking your correct maps out in Max or whatever other program you're using. Now here I loaded the model into Marmoset Toolbag really quickly with nothing but the diffuse map on, just to kind of get a feel for what does this look like with the textures. And I think we got a great result. I'm really happy with how this turned out. The only thing I can see wrong with it is maybe some seams on the edges of the blade, but I can always go into 3D Code or ZBrush or paint those out. It takes 2 seconds to do that. But this looks pretty slick, and all I have to do now is pay attention to the other masking maps in Dota and get the glowing effect to working. Rig it to the bone system, skin it to the bone system, and import it into the game. So thanks for watching this. I hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you in the next part.